hope that's all right. I hope it's not going to be too boring. But anyway, so I'll talk a bit about the creative city idea, its past, present, and what its potential future could be. And as you know, practically every city is really thinking about where it is and where it's going. So if we then connect that to say, okay, Kristiansand, well, what would that be? What would the aim be of Kristiansand says? This is an interesting idea, perhaps. Now, is it about rethinking how the city operates? Is it about regenerating this harbour area? Or is it trying to resonate to the outside world, so not too many young people leave and more young people come and stay? Or is it all of that? So that's a question to you. I can't answer that question. But I think it's quite interesting to look at then, creative city then, and now, because, in fact, they're always creative cities. Cities are the laboratories of solving the problem of their own making. And this you will recognise is Siena, and most people think that Siena is a great place, and it is. But in the context, for example, of the UK, and perhaps also here, clearly the decline in things like shipbuilding was a key thing. That's just one example. It could have been steel or whatever else. And all of these industries were going down, money was going down, jobs, etc. You know all of that. And lots of businesses obviously went out of, collapsed and so on. So many people, many cities were asking themselves, I remember in Glasgow in whenever it was, 79, my God, the population had reduced by 200,000, so obviously they were saying, what the hell have we got? And this is then really how a new wave of creativity in terms of urban creativity evolved. This happens to be in Poland, but this could be anywhere. So these are the sort of places left behind, and what do you do with them? Often they became cultural centres, as you know. But the novelty, probably, in all of this, was people, in the contrast, you know, when Siena was being creative, or in the 19th century were inventing how to deal with cholera. We didn't self-consciously say, I want to become a creative city. That really did begin probably 30 years ago. And what it was really about is trying to create the conditions for people to think, plan, and act with imagination in order to solve their problems and create opportunities, and ask themselves, well, what the hell have we got? And initially, it was a sort of arts and culture focus, arts in a narrow sense, but also culture, who are we type question. And then people then realised, of course, there were the spin-offs of that, creative jobs, all of these things that you know of, symbolic effects for tourism and so on. If you ask people, why do you come to a city? Often it's for tourism reasons. And so all of this is, of course, about identity. And the reason why the arts focus and arts as industry was so strong is, of course, that when you look at them, not as isolated little elements, if you look at dance, it's tiny. If you look at dance and graphics and music and so and so, or if you look at a record production, it has all of these things together, which is a hell of a lot of jobs. And that was the key persuasive thing. So, for example, in Britain, when it became clear in the early 80s that the exports of the British music industry was more than the exports of the car manufacturing industry, people said, oh, perhaps there's something here, it's not as vague as I think, it's relatively important, and so on. So what the idea really tries to connect is this triad between, can you be a bit imaginative, culture, narrow, broad, and a city? In order to explore how you can navigate in a positive way urban transformation. But of course, over time, you know, you're aware, and we're all aware, that there's a bigger story. And the bigger story is basically a culture of creativity. Is it the way a place works? Is it open-minded, and so on? Because of course, as you know, there is social creativity, business creativity, academic creativity, I can't even say all the words, bureaucratic creativity. And that is my big, big subject that we'll come to at the end. I run a festival in Berlin. 1,700 people came from 50 countries, all these oxymoron people, creative bureaucrats. Anyway, so what this is about is really, you could say it's trying to have a shift in paradigm. It's trying to say, well, let's look at things through a different lens. It's, in theory, well, that was my hope when I wrote the big books initially, was that it's an empowering ethos. It was saying that ordinary people, everybody, can make the extraordinary happen if given a chance. So you already see that we're talking about something that's more open, more flexible, less rigid, and so on, more open-minded, of course. But over time, of course, we've had to refocus on what the actual focus is. Is it always just the arts? And of course, we all know that the silo has had an incredible impact and so on. And now, of course, you might say, well, is this creativity addressing the bigger issues that are around us? And I don't need to mention those. And there you would say, for example, and what role can the arts have in that, in helping deal with these bigger issues? And what that implies, as I think you can already feel, I hope you're feeling it, is that you need to think in an integrated way. And of course we know, we all learn something, a topic. Now I'm not against the discipline, but we also need to learn, I think, how other disciplines work. So one needs to know the essence of finance, even if they're not a financier. Otherwise people would just say, you don't know how the world works. So in terms of looking at the future of cities and places, Kristiansand as an example, there are these massive issues that I'll just highlight in a few seconds, which is, you know, the fact that it could be, you could say the climate issue is 1 minute towards midnight, and for many of us, some of these things, you know, in Britain the summer was weird, lots of rain and so on. I know there's rain in Britain, but this was more than normal, was a wake-up call. A wake-up call that we need to do something today. You know that sentence, yesterday you said tomorrow, and tomorrow is actually today. So what is one going to do? And where I live, an artist friend of mine, whose books I create for him, he's quite funny. He always has this public art. And he said a while back, lockdown. I thought it was fantastic. So every time anybody walked past the centre of Stroud, the place near I live, it said, lockdown. So I thought, well, let's wait till the sun comes. Lockdown. Perhaps there's a silver lining in this, and as we well know, it was the biggest experiment in climate change emission reduction the world has known, although we haven't learned from it, that that's a separate problem. But we all know that the Earth hurts, and the Earth hurts, and the way, I mean, certainly in that lockdown period, the oxygen, certainly where I lived, felt a bit better, so again, a brighter picture. But in general, what all of this is saying is the fragility around us is immense, and, you know, things can fall apart, and we know what the solution is. We've got to reduce the footprint of our footprint, and I'm not saying we put fossil fuels to bed, but there's a version of that that one might need to do. And also the problem, of course, for a city has its citizens, all of that. The issue is a global problem. So how can one, you know, feel global when, you know, I don't know, something next door is a problem. I realise that. But what it's all about is thinking beyond the self. And when you look around, there are so many exhibitions or shows which seem to be saying they don't say it exactly, but they're more or less saying there needs to be a different contract between the individual and the group. And I remember quite a while ago in Copenhagen seeing this. It was in the design centre or something. It said, be best not in, but for the world. And that's, I mean, a city that is pioneering would say that of itself. Because if you've got a city like that, of course young people will feel attracted to a city that's being for the world rather than purely egotistical. So it's actually a very good strategy. But in general, I mean, when you think of the loneliness crisis, the anxiety crisis, particularly of the young, we know that there is a yearning for something different, in spite of the fact that I'm looking at this cruise ship here. It's a bit weird. But anyway, on we go. So in all of that, we sort of hit a bit of a brick wall, because that's all easy to say, and you all know that. And of course there's an epochal challenge. I can hardly say the word epochal challenge. And that challenge, whether we like it or not, is the market on its own is just not going to solve this problem. Whatever people who might be of neoliberal persuasion think, it will not solve it. It's just a fact. Evidence everywhere proves that. So one has to bend the market to these bigger picture aims. And bending the market, I'll come to, has one bend a market is the key thing. And indeed, when you look at it, I was just thinking, Christ, there's all this finance stuff. This is why I keep on talking about finance. Urban planners need to really know about finance and everything else, as do social affairs people. There are so many interesting virtuous investment vehicles that think slightly differently. You know, take 1% less. Aren't maximising profit, you know, green investment bonds, resilience bonds, there's just many of these. So there's stuff out there. So this reminds me, and I apologise if I'm going to sound incredibly naive now, because I'm going to ask a question, because so much is here. I took this picture in Bilbao, I thought, what is he doing there? I loved it. But it made me ask the question, what is a city? So what is a city? Of course you know what a city is, but it's quite interesting just to summarise, in some ways, the totality of what it is, because it's actually a living organism. Now, if it's a living organism, what are the skills we need to address a living organism that's moving a bit like I'm moving around now and so on, that has funny formations? This is a surrealist image, don't worry. But you get the point. It's a bit like a mycelium in the ground. It's going here and there and spreading its tentacles. And if it's a living organism, then the famous person, you probably know, one of the first urban planners who was a biologist, called Patrick Geddes, 130 years ago, Edinburgh, he said, I think it's a fantastic statement, a city is more than a place in space, it's a drama in time. And the drama, obviously, I'm so glad I saw this boat this morning and came in. So one of the dramas is, of course, what you've just done recently with the silo. But what it reminds me of, because of silo thinking, all of that, it reminds me that, of course, city making is a collective endeavour. Of course, we know that, but do we act in that way? Are the organisational structures set up in such a way that people with mutual respect from different disciplines, and we'll come back to hierarchies of disciplines in a minute, are really working together? So if you then think of cities in terms of, and this is very simplistic, and I won't go into it in detail, cities in terms of the qualities and characteristics of a city, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4, once you start numbers it just goes on forever. But basically 1.0 is sort of, 0.0 is our historical city, 1.0 very much the industrial city, dividing functions, 2.0 we're trying to spectacularize the city, 3.0 we might be trying to co-create things, be more participate, 4.0 might be, I don't know what, you know, we're sensorizing the whole place. But anyway, it's quite useful to have those things in the back of one's mind as one thinks through things. Now, one thing's absolutely clear, that cities are more than complicated, they are complex. And also, they are messy. And in the mess that one has, we've got to negotiate that. And somehow, I saw this in Canada, it's lovely, this is the ideal poster I wanted. These things need to be aligned in some sense and orchestrated so that it comes together. Now, all of this, of course, is easy. So in that orchestration, what is so key, and this is again why we don't want the historical people, the heritage people to be over there, they're a bit boring, they're just being conservationists, they need to be right there. know that history is key for a city. But now I'm saying the obvious, cities of course is people. City are activities, economic activities, social activities, cultural activities and so on. It's hardware, and already it's getting more complicated. It's software, it's all these little electrical things, all of this stuff here. If this wasn't here, you wouldn't hear me. It's orgware to keep computer language going on, you know, how we manage, how we organise, how we operationalise things. It's the networks, the textures between cities, how we're connecting with each other. And of course, there is this, how this fits into a mosaic, some form of collaboration. And how one then calibrates, and again, I know you know this, but it's worth restating. How do we calibrate that public interest, that common interest? I know Margaret Thatcher said there is nothing like society, but I'm not sure she's correct. There is the public interest. And there's obviously the private interest. Sometimes it's self-interested, sometimes it's very good, not profit, all of that. And of course, there's the research capacities of academia and so on. But I think when one's thinking, and I know this, you've thought about this because I spent the day with some of you yesterday, that this all relates to blending an ambition together in some form. And an ambition is about forward motion. And I very, very rarely, if at all, use the word vision, because I think what's much more important, and there's a couple of books here you can take away later, called Cities of Ambition, because ambition is an engine, a driver, and so on. And there will be some plan of where I want to go, but unless you have that drive, I think, not you, the city, one doesn't sort of accelerate forward in a way that, for example, might address the question of young people leaving. And then, I believe, what then happens and can happen is there sort of resonance. Because places need a resonance, because, in a way, Kristiansand will not fill this area with hundreds of people doing stuff unless other people also come here beyond the people on the ship. Come here, because otherwise the shops and so will obviously not be filled up. So resonance is key, because resonance, I think, can lead to, instead of people leaving the place, to them ideally coming back. Now, of course, everything I said doesn't actually tell us what the future is. That's clearly pretty definite, and that will be up to you to decide. But I think in that, using all of that together, there is some sort of plan B in people's minds. And what is that plan B? Now, I think a lot of this is about storytelling. And that story that Kristiansand might say of itself, and I think it needs to be a story beyond Lagmannsholmen, has to be a story, ideally, that really touches people in their heart and, you know, really compels them to want to be a maker, shaper, co-creator of that story. Now, I was asked to do an exhibition in Sicily, and I won't talk too much about it, but we drove around in this lovely art vehicle saying, "Come, politicians, come to this exhibition," or whatever we said. Anyway, but the main point was, it made me think, what is actually, how do you summarise the art of creative city making? And one phrase, I'm so glad it jumped into my mind, is good creative city making, place making is, what is it like? It's more like improvised jazz than a well-tempered symphony performance. And if the symphony people are here, I'm not against you, but I think it's more like jazz. And it's like jazz because we have to improvise, we have to, you know, be adaptive, and so on. And again, you might think all these things are just merely slogans, but if they are absorbed and immersed into one's mindscape, they affect action. So what are our resources? And again, something, you know, it's so simple, but took me a while to put it in just 10 words, is culture is who we are, where we came from, what we can be, etc. And creativity might help what we can become. So this is the connection between those two things. And when that came into my mind that clearly, rather than just generalizing in my mind, it felt like a breakthrough. And it is the other invisible hand. We always talk about the invisible hand of the market, but the other invisible hand is the driver of culture and so on, because it shapes how we think, our values and so on. But it's not our operating system, so we don't normally use that as the primary thing. The primary thing might be say, how are we going to use this land? Hey, how much money can the Port Authority get for moving the ships around the corner? All of these issues, rather than this bigger thing, which is that the city making is actually a cultural project. It's the biggest cultural project of Kristiansand. Your cultural project is not some dance performance, it's the future of Kristiansand. Because it's about the values, habits, mindsets that are being inserted into all the micro and macro decisions that are taking place, and what aesthetics you think are good, what behaviour and so on. And of course that responds, you know, the water, it responds to your weather, amazing, apparently it's not windy today, fantastic, etc., etc. And the result of all of that, I believe, is, when we think about all these values and so on, it etches itself into the physical. That's why so many places look different. Of course they look different, because they're responding to their circumstances. And it establishes, of course, how people operate, how they manage the city. Is it more hierarchical, bossy, or is it more participative? Everything for you to think about, not me. Anyway, but that's how ultimately we see and feel the city that we're in. Now, one of my things, I read a little book, you can download it online, I haven't got any more copies, which is called The Sensory Landscape of Cities. And one of the things I try to do, which has shaped my thinking, is going through the city through every sense. What does this feel like? What does it smell like? What does it, all of those things. And when you do that, I think, for me, it sort of really opens out perspective. So, you know, I'm not saying you're going to be blue like the city of Jodhpur in India, but obviously Jodhpur feels completely different because it's completely blue. But, you know, if you take a sensory, this is a bit weird what I'm going to show you now, is Banksy subverting Bristol Museum, which had more visitors than the whole of the city of Bristol added together. They had about, I don't know, 1,000 visitors a month, and then they had 250,000. So this sensory understanding here is obviously talking about us and nature, our relationship to that. So in a way, in this sensory feeling, it is the question of what are we individually bringing to the city itself. Now, I did something quite weird, and I know you know the answer. I did a survey of the disciplines, you know, what is a surveyor, an architect, da, da, da. So I did this survey, and I want to know your predictions on the impacts on city making. Who was seen as more important than others? Okay, so you give me your predictions later. So there are all these disciplines which are mostly operating in silos and looking at the world through their lens. So, yeah, we asked the architect, okay? We asked architects who they thought were most important in making cities. They, of course, said, we cover three-dimensional space, so we are most important. Others said that they think they're most important. Is it the land use planner who's looking at things a bit from the sky? Is it the engineer who's actually making all of this work? Is it the transport planner? Is it the economics person who's thinking, yes, growth will happen? Is it the environmental person? Is it this Department of Social Affairs? It's actually a coffee house, but this is the Department of Coffee and Social Affairs. But basically, is it perhaps the culture vulture person? Now, the reality is you know what the results are, and your predictions are correct. I'm not even going to ask you. The architects were seen as the dominant force. So when you've got these hierarchical positions in how plans work, increasingly now also the economics people come up and so on, but all I'm saying is there's something going on, and perhaps leaving aside that one needs to collaborate and co-create, the power relations between different disciplines, I believe, needs to be reset, because I think only in that, as I said, in that collective way, will that livable interesting, wonderful place come about. Now, some of the guiding principles you've already are implied with what I've said, but I'll do another one. There's a series of simple statements here, so begin. Right, so Kristiansand. Is this a city of projects? Lagmannsholmen being one, Silo another, etc. Or is the city the project? And the moment you shift from is it a city of projects to the city is a project, lots of things happen in the mind. Because then one says, okay, the port, they need to maximise the money to go over there. Yeah? Right. If they need to maximise the money, we can predict what's going to happen here. Kristiansand's idea that this is a city for all, and it's all for all, this is a place for all, is completely impossible. It cannot happen. Because with an aging population and the fact that we've got a sea view and so on, it's going to be for people who've got more money. And as is it Leda, who said yesterday in the Krutthuset, he said, I spoke to a 25-year-old and she asked her, what do you want to happen here? And she said, whatever you do, I want it to feel as if I belong here. Now, given that logic that exists, it cannot happen. It will not happen. So therefore, one has to look at it as the city as a project, so that one can make balances between various things. I don't know, give someone some other rights over there, or whatever. Widen the sense of what capital means and what success and failure is. I'm being positive, by the way, but I'm just trying to be logical. That it's just a fact, isn't it? You know, I'd love to be living here, looking over the water. Another guiding principle is cultural planning, where we think I'm planning a theatre, I'm building a building, or planning culturally. I don't know how that translates into Norwegian, but in English, planning culturally means an understanding of the essence of a place, where it comes from, how it reacts, and all of these sort of things, which then have manifestations, for example, in art forms. Whereas if we say cultural planning, we just only think all the time. It's a weaker concept. They're just saying, okay, we've got the infrastructure, museums, all of which are important, but it's not as rich as the latter. Another principle, I think, for me, is cultural resources and distinctiveness, because once you then have that wider frame, the cultural resources are absolutely massive. You know, it's obviously history, it's all that, it's rituals, it's traditions. Then the sort of thing you're asking is, can I take an old tradition, twist it into the new, can I link new technology to something? It suddenly opens out possibilities. And particularly what's so crucial, for me at least, is this question of it being distinctive by its Kristiansand rather than, I don't know, whatever board it is, and so on. So what we do personally is we then do these asset audits, but what we're then doing is just looking at the hard things, the invisible things, the tangible things, and so on. So another principle that is all, it's not a principle, but is we're always looking at the interplay between culture in the biggest sense, the way of life of a place, how can we respond to that, and the narrower sense. So then I would ask, well, what is the manifestation in artistic terms of that, let's say, to push, for example, a climate agenda in the city? So another is what I've discovered, and I don't know if you agree. Some people might think this sentence is not true. I found that if you talk to people, they tend to be more conservative than radical. You may disagree with me, but in broad terms, it's probably, I heard that people in Kristiansand like saying no, and Norwegians like saying no rather than yes, if that's true. I believe it's a case that if one goes with the grain of someone's culture, which is to some extent acknowledging, people are much more likely to change and do something quite radical. Seems counterintuitive, but in my experience it's true. So what I've said basically says that there should be a 360-degree perspective, and blending the thinking, software thinking, social thinking, economic thinking, physical, anyway you get the idea, be 360 degree. And then, if you were then to say, well, what's my slogan for Kristiansand? This is the slogan, by the way, of the Greater Bureaucracy Festival. How do you move from a no because culture, no you can't do that, to a yes if? And that completely changes the organisational culture. And again, of course, you'll say, oh, that's bloody easy to say, just sloganising all the time. But in my experience, that is quite important. And this 360-degree, sorry, this is a horrible picture, but this 360-degree, more a yes rather than a no, is quite important to me at least. Then one of the things, not okay to be okay, I did this City of Ambition survey. I did, funnily enough, with cities roughly your size, when I say roughly 250,000, Saint-Étienne, whatever, you know, those sort of cities. And I looked at cities that exactly seemed to have the same resources. There might have been industrial, might have shifted. This is a gunpowder place, Saint-Étienne was the main weapons manufacturing place in France. Why did places that had the same resources, why did some do better than others? And the reason was, simplifying, is they said it's not okay to be okay. They had ambition, and that ambition was then reflected in everything I've just said earlier about linking the sectors together, seeing the soft and the hard, and all of that. They seemed to move more ahead than those who didn't do that. Then, what of course I've said is thinking about experiments occasionally and stuff like that. Having a default position that that's an okay thing. And it's quite interesting, if you were a firm, if the city were a firm, and someone said to you, yeah, I do no research and development, I do no R&D, I just always do what I always do. If you were a firm, you'd say, well, you're going to go bankrupt, aren't you? Because you're not responding to changing circumstances. And that's why, you know, vanity is shifting. We need to be continually doing experiments, like that funny thing you gave me yesterday with the chaos pilots. Brilliant stuff. K. Another K. Anyway, chaos. What was it? Quantum, yeah. So about fostering R&D. And that, and as Wenke said yesterday, have room for the unexpected, which means not neutralise everything, because in a way, that concealer, who would have predicted that that would suddenly come out of nowhere, and it may be something that has a dramatic impact on you as a city. So the other point about that, which you already can see, is taking a glass half full approach, because of course we know the problems we're in are dreadful. But unless we have a glass half full approach, in my view, we will just become so repressed, and I feel it gives energy. And so it also means, related to that, is weakness into strength. And Knut, I think, was once at an event, I was talking in Helsinki, and I, believe it or not, had invented something in Helsinki, which is again retrospectively so obvious, which was the Festival of Light that's now been going on for 25 years. Now, well, of course, what did I do? I said, well, what's the stuff of Helsinki? Yes, it's dark. Have you got traditions with light? Of course you do, because you put a candle up every here and there. So, of course, let's take that and scale it up onto a massive scale. And, you know, it's an interesting set of activities that happens. It's just an example. So, that was just one example. And what that means in the end as well is, so often, I've been in meetings where, I don't know what to do with this, but I'll just hold it. I've been in meetings where someone says, what's our vision? And then someone says from the back of the room, well, what's the rules? Well, that's precisely the point. The rules should be reframed because the vision is probably a bit new. So anyway, as it says here, reframing, so vision shapes the rules, not the existing rules, the vision. And another way of putting it, because everything I've said, because we're dealing in a world of complexity, as you know, is really how do you move? And planning, as we know, is more predict and provide. Historically, I want to put 500 metres of asphalt down the road and stuff like that, and it costs X, Y, Z, to elastic planning. And elastic planning, to me, is a great concept because it's strategically principled and tactically flexible. So many of the big decisions, we don't know the precise answer. Of course we don't know the precise answer, but we know the direction of travel. I'm sure in your vision it says something like, we want to be sustainable, net zero, I don't know what it says, but broadly everybody's saying the same things. How we get there is of course the issue where one needs to tactically to be flexible. And so partly, I think in summary, and I'm going to stop in a sec, what I'm saying is we need to shift the status balances between the different actors, both within an organisation like this and between organisations. Because, at least in my experience, and it's difficult by the way, we all know it's difficult, connecting and networking, all of that we know is difficult, of course. But it is the direction of travel. And this brings me finally to something which is the creative bureaucracy, why, what and how. And why that came about is when initially the Creative City idea came about, it was, let's say, a little arts focused, and then it saw social innovations and so on. And then I realised practically at every moment, a administration is involved in some way. So the aims of the thing is really to recapture the positive virtues of bureaucracy. Of course the phrase is oxymoron, but the beauty of oxymorons, which is again another Creative City strategy, is it forces you to say, you know, with this German professor, we love professors by the way, but this German one said, das ist ein Unterschied, einfach über die kreative Bürokratie zu sprechen. Anyway, the point is, it's about sort of getting the head to sort of flip and say, what the hell do you mean? And what I meant and mean is, yes, there are, I don't know, 40 million civil servants in Europe. Not all of them are stupid. Many of them struggle against regimes and stuff like that. And they might have something to offer, but they may be trapped in a system. So what this event does, it basically celebrates people from around the world who might have solutions to various problems. So one of the main guiding principles there is to rethink incentives and regulations, to be willing to do things which fail, to have flatter structures, all of the things that you can imagine, obviously, to be digitally competent and so on. So that's what that's about. May see you there sometime. But I feel it's a movement in the making because the people who are there, last June, 1,700 came, is they sort of feel we're not alone, you know, we're not alone. So the next steps, I just want to say a couple of words about the Boulevard thing and the Guggenheim thing. Clearly, when Boulevard tells the story of itself, it doesn't always talk about the Guggenheim just in passing. It talks a lot about public space, about gathering places. It talks about its cooperative things in the Basque Country, Mondragon, which is nearby, the biggest cooperative, I suppose, network of companies in the world, and so on. So, Guggenheim, of course, it was contentious, as you know, but there are other things that have happened. But now, just in passing, Kristiansand might not like this because the word revolution is in it, is they, and I'm involved in this, is we're developing something which is called the Urban Revolution Initiative, which basically says the way we do things isn't working. We've got to move more quickly to do things differently, to do the sort of things we all say and mean it. So what we're building is a community of practitioners, activists, thinkers, allies, who will be working on this, and we have an award thing next month. And this Urban Revolution Initiative, funded by the Basque government and the major companies, just in passing, even though the word revolution is in it, is going to celebrate, not celebrate, but show many, many examples, hundreds of examples of where things are done differently. So that's just a tiny bit on Boulevard. And Lagmannsholmen, I've actually already told you what I thought before, the difficulty. So I do feel it's a bit between a rock and a hard place. I don't know what that's in Norwegian. So should we just stop for the moment? I mean, you can ask me questions. I've got a game to
I'm just going to do something which is hopefully quite enjoyable. Normally, if we're doing it, it takes a long, long time. It's sort of measuring the creativity of Kristiansand in this case, according to various criteria. And we developed this with Bilbao about 15 years ago. They said, you know, they were in crisis and saying, how can we must attract various people, all sorts of people. So they attracted all sorts of people, including myself, to do something. And it's called the Creative City Index. So we're just going to play this a bit. You and the tables are going to have a quick chat and make a judgment about the criteria I'm going to tell you. Now, of course, it's not scientific, so don't come to me, Professore. join the table. But it tends to be quite interesting, and what happens is in the end you have an evaluation of a city according to 1, dreadful, 10, marvellous, nobody gets 10, etc., because that's nearly impossible. But it's really a strategic tool that people can think, is this my situation? How do I get from 4 to 5? What are the characteristics of 5? What are the characteristics of 6 and 7? And of course, it's quite difficult, and you know, we're not going to be able to go through everything. You're looking at it as a totality, the city, public, private, voluntary. Try and look at it comprehensively. If we had more time, one could make it more relaxed. Anyway, forgive me, yeah? So we're measuring it, and we're doing it according to 4 clusters, yes? And we'll start off with the first cluster. I'll tell you what the 4 clusters are. The first is, how can we identify and nurture the creativity of Kristiansand? So what's the level of openness, trust, accessibility, participation, talent development, the learning landscape? Learning can be 47-year-olds learning as well as 22-year-olds. So that's the first one I'm going to ask you to do in a second. The second one is enabling and supporting that creativity, that innovative capacity, and so on. And the sort of things you look at there, what is the political framework, the strategy? Does the city do what it says it's going to do? Is it effective? Has it got agility, vision, and so on? The third cluster is this exploited? Is it connecting? Is there entrepreneurship at various levels? There can be bureaucratic entrepreneurship as well as business entrepreneurship. Is the city communicating, connecting? I mean, communication is both connecting as people, but communication is obviously trains, buses, planes, but all of that. But we can't go into everything. And fourthly, the lived experience of this place. Is it distinctive, diverse? Is the placemaking that's currently happening great? Is the level of well-being and livability great? So those are the 4 domains. And then what happens in the end, you get a scale, and there we are. Yeah, you get the idea. So, this is now over to you. Can you on your table, and I know this is going to be very rapid because there's 4 elements, and then you've got to quickly say what you think. There's 50 minutes, so 10 minutes for each element, yeah? And then 10 minutes at the end getting together. So your first task, and it's ready, steady, go. Is that here? Discuss how good and how well is Kristiansand doing. And professors, here, don't avoid. Perhaps you know, so they know what you know.
Okay.
Any questions, ask me, but just go with the flow. Look, it doesn't matter. You're bound to say something interesting. And in the end, as you're having after about 8 minutes, I'll say, make your score. And of course it's not perfect, because someone would say, on the one hand it's 4, and the other hand it's 7. And the disagreements are wonderful, because when you disagree, that's what's the discussion that one wants about a city, is this disagreement. Yeah? So, perhaps there are too many on the table, but you'll work it out. I'm going to disappear. In 8 minutes I'll be back.
Right, in 2 minutes, just give an instinctive score, because I'm going to ask you what your score is in 2 minutes. So quickly, with instinct, say whatever it is. Okay. Right. I'm going to take Knud's table, just because I know you moderately well. Anyone on that table, did you have any idea of what you evaluated at the table? You guessed what?
We ended up sort of somewhere very
in the middle.
In the middle, and then bit
okay, so what were the extremes?
we didn't get that far, actually.
Oh, so you said 4, 5. 4. 6. 6. Oh my God. 3. Good. 5. Okay, this went from 3 to 6, but you did sort of. Okay, that's okay-ish. Yeah. Right. Over to you. What did you say?
I said 7.
7. 5. 6. Don't think too much. You're thinking too much. 5. 4. Yeah. They work together. 4, 7. Interesting. Right, over there. What do you think? 2. Brilliant! Brilliant! Tell me why it's 2. Why is it a 2?
We think there's a lack of creativity, and we definitely do not nurture creativity and look for talent developments and all in all. And we thought about, is it just a Norwegian thing or is it just a Kristiansand thing? We didn't quite agree. You can just ask one of us.
Oh, no, it's 2. But we love it. Because then, if we're doing this over 6 hours, you can imagine the beautiful conversation, arguing. But that's brilliant. So there's a 2. You might have a conversation later, 2 versus 7. Okay,
I think almost a little bit more 4. 2
4. Jesus. Okay, you're 4. 3. Ah, you see this table go downwards in random trying to lift everybody up. Okay. Okay, that's great. So what was the highest number on this table?
4.
Oh my God, you see? So this is the middling table. This is, okay, that's brilliant. But can you see, I think this is wonderful anyway, but that's just me being stupid. Now on we go. Right, now, enabling. Okay, the political framework. Ready, steady, go. 8 minutes and then 2 minutes discussing it. Ready, steady, go. I'll be asking you something.
Jag tror det vi är inte med och busar som är så olika, så jag tror vi är lite mer till optimistiska stad. Jag tänker mer på 5 år och jag tror vi är effektiva i kreativa processer och det är ganska sikt på
Right, now scores, please. Okay, the ladies and gentlemen. And dearest ones. Anya, you start off. What did you think? What? 6. Yes. 6. Yes. Right. 5. Okay, 5. What about you? 6. So, thank you. Let's put Becky in the spotlight. What number did you give?
We're between 6 and 7 on framework.
Okay, 6 and 7. So quite positive. Is that because you work in the authority? No,
It's just what it was.
Oh, yeah. So 6 and 7. So, I mean, do you feel, in general, that the political framework is there, but what about the leadership? Leadership, I suppose they're talking politicians now. Does that work? Venki did this. But anyway, is that a general view, a bit of this?
Is it the political leadership? Or is
Yeah, I'm now asking next, because
With this period, it's like they're not well use all the money on like health and social and education.
right.
So that's the reason we said we have the framework, but we should like get more money to not get the framework focus.
Right, so here, what's coming up here, which is why you need a longer discussion, of course, you might have a good framework, and I think you're broadly saying it's...
from you?
I think you are very positive. It's broadly high on the framework, but then when you're then translating it into something, then there's a bit of an issue, and that is obviously a much bigger conversation. I'm remembering all the numbers, by the way, so there will be a report afterwards. What about this table on the numbers here? 3! There, thank you. There's a 3 here, yeah? What's your job?
Heritage.
Heritage, okay. The heritage framework, okay. What another number here on the screen?
4.
4.
5.
5. 3, 4, 5. Yeah, what else?
I'm not really sure because it depends on if it's which period.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So 4.
4. Okay. I'm looking at you. 5. Okay. Okay. You haven't said anything yet.
I don't know.
Okay, don't know, which is also a very good answer. That's a good answer. Don't know is a good answer. So that means the vision is not clear, etc., etc., etc. So that's good. But anyway, there was a difference. I think it's really, really quite interesting. But I think what's just come to me is this thing about the framework, let's say, within the administration is relatively clear, you're relatively professional, you sort of know what you're doing, but there may be something about the agility and all of that leadership thing. What do you think, Christina?
I give it a 3.
You agree?
Yeah, 3.
3, oh, 3,
Yeah.
3. Yeah, I like that. You've got the work also quite near 3 and 7. Again, what do you?
Yeah, I started with 5, but they talked it down to 4.
But actually, but that's a very good point, because I spent a day with Randy yesterday, and his sort of positive thing is really quite infectious, and it's really great, I think, from a creative city perspective. Because do you remember I said, looking at the thing glass half full, we know things always are more difficult, so you might as well start like that, because you'll be worn down and whipped down in the end. So, I'm exaggerating. I know there's no Kristiansand whip, but anyway, a few more numbers here.
3.
3.
2.
You've got a companion. You've got a companion. What's your name? I forgot your name.
Mine.
Yeah.
Stine.
Tina.
Stine.
Tina. Okay, you two can have a combination dance later or something. Anyway, you've got the idea. There's a bit of problems around this topic. Next one, because we're looking at the time, is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is obviously business entrepreneurship, but it could also be in the third sector, social entrepreneurship, but also entrepreneurship in the bureaucratic sense. So, ready, steady, go. We'll leave out the thing about connections to do with rail and train and these things and airports, and I realise there's a bit of issues there. But just how does the city connect with each other, the different groups?
You know, because we were talking earlier about city making as a collective experience or thing. So ready, steady, go. Okay, can you gather your numbers? We'll just say them instinctively. We'll start with Christina's table here, if that's okay. Who haven't I asked? But have you got an instinctive number? Any of you? 4.
We have 7.
7, 8. The first 8. The first 8. Yeah. Tell me why it's 8.
Oh, I think we have very many big, projects. We have items in the city. We have the Krutthuset, we have Kilden, we also have Jägersberg, we have Strömmerhaven, that is healthcare, national, really breaking news. So we are doing so many new thinking projects.
Right.
Developing the city that way.
Right.
So it is both in the office, what is it? Public, but also entrepreneurs. And you were talking about oil business here, international business.
Right. Why did you say 4 then when our friend there said 8?
I think we are
It's interesting to people have such different experiences.
I think we can do more.
We can do more.
Maybe because he said so.
I think we have a lot of creative pockets looking for a framework.
When you say you have lots of creative pockets looking for a framework, you mean they're separated?
Yeah, they're separated in business, and they do well in business, they do well in some parts of the public sector, they do well in arts, but we don't have a framework to nurture it, to make people come into it.
Comes together. I mean, one of the things, again, if one was doing this a much longer thing, one would then, let's say, agree somehow it's this, whatever the number is. The number doesn't really matter, it's the conversation in the number. And then one would say, well, what would one do to get from what you said to what you said, and what is the issue? And that would be strategy making, wouldn't it? That intense or interesting conversation. So that's just how I'm saying how it works. So we can. So this was quite positive. This grouping here. That was an 8er, and this is a more a 4er. So look, did you see what Christina did? She went. Okay. You went. Yeah. So these are the two movements. If I'm pretending to be this table. So that's what that table is. Okay, over to you. What are you thinking? You don't have to speak first, because it couldn't also be heritage. No, I'm only saying that because I look at you, because obviously I know you.
5.
A 4.
5.
5. Yeah, so but this table is table number normal, isn't it? It's always 4 and 5. We're okay, it's not too bad, it's not too good. No, I'm not saying it's like that. But do you think, just speaking to your table as an example, do you think there's good sort of, I mean, Ranya's saying there's not really connection between the bubbles. Do you think there is connection between the bubbles, or do you think they operate in separate universes? I mean, what you're really saying, do you remember we said city making is a collective endeavour, we need a story that brings the different people from different directions together. I think it's true that does help shape places.
No, I think as we talked a little bit about yesterday, this concept of disjoint incrementalism is quite relevant often in
just in case people didn't hear, this is a key phrase that comes from someone who had forgotten someone. Anyway, it's called disjointed incrementalism, which fits into a bit of this it's a project, a city of projects. There's lots going on, which you just said. There's lots going on, but perhaps the project of the city you would want, I don't know, the businesses to communicate with whoever and so on. Right. Okay. This is the 4-5 table. We can just. And there's a lot in the 4-5, and this is 4-8. And now we come to Sine and Anja's and Benke's table. What do they say?
Okay, we ended up on a 5 or something like that. And I guess it somehow reflects like the points given on this table. Because we recognize that there's a bit of innovation, or a lot of innovation going on, but also the networking and the collectiveness might not be as we.
Okay.
But also it was a little bit of a tricky question.
But in broad terms, you were within the same
broad. We had two.
Two clubs, okay. So that club was that. Now, the Benke and club, were you bullying?
More for because I think it's a lack of private initiative. So the private entrepreneurship is a lack of that. Yeah, we are too few people.
You mean too few people to not startups or whatever you mean or something?
And I think also it reflects our first cluster, the low culture. The lack of good culture and to cooperate and be open and be willing to.
Yes, rather than no, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, no, I understand. If you have long tables, obviously it's a bit more difficult for that gentleman to speak to. In an ideal world, it would be a round table. But that's life. So are we ending roughly with your sort of assessment?
4.5.
4.5. That's right. No, 4.67. Yeah. No, but I mean, what one would then do, it would be really interesting to then work out, as I was repeating myself, what would it take to go from 5 to 6? What would that specifically mean? What would the project be? Okay, we're nearing the final lap. And the final lap is, what the hell is it like living here, basically? But can I just point out a tiny thing here? Quite often you have, if you're, let's say, doing this in a Bruges or somewhere, anyway, a historic place, you would say, oh, the place is lovely and so on. But that's why I say place and placemaking, because sometimes the place is very nice, in broad terms, let's say the centre, but then the new things that are happening are not so nice, or in reverse. So there's a bit of, not tension in that, but I'm just saying be a bit aware of that. Okay, so is this a vital, livable, blah-de-blah place? Ready, steady, go again. Okay, we're on the final lap. Shall we start with, before you eat your sandwich, shall we start with you here? Okay, what conclusions did you reach on this table, for example?
6.
6.
7 in the summer.
7 in the summer. That's very good. So the strategy has to be, what do we do in the winter, basically? Yeah. It's always easy, yeah. So 7 in the summer, and what else? Was that a sort of consensus?
6.
7. Okay, so basically you think the quality of life is pretty good here. Well, Norway is quite well off, isn't it? So, in general, yeah. But I mean, there must be some pockets of poverty somewhere. Are there? Yeah. And is there unemployment? There must be somewhere.
It's quite a bit of quite high unemployment going forward.
But in comparison to other countries,
in comparison to the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah.
There are some living conditions.
Right. So, Sina, your table and Venka's table, what do you come up with?
In general, we're really positive. So 6, 7.
Yeah, really positive. And what in your positiveness, what sort of things did you highlight being so positive?
So we think that we are starting to become a city with diversity. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
We're like 5 or 7.
Yeah.
But we're good at like place making, and we feel like we live in a municipality and all that is livable and and the well-being is pretty good.
Yeah. Hospitals, all this sort of stuff.
Right, and and you can buses and you can get around. And But on the expression tells you we feel like we're a friendly city and like a nice city, but maybe not the most provocative city.
You're provocative. So everybody is not provocative apart from Sina. Yeah. You know, I see what you mean. It's sort of friendly, like that, rather than sort of football. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, no, that's good. Do people agree with that? A friendly city, but not really sort of bursting out with vitality. Is that right? Yeah, okay. What about Camilla's table? Oh, sorry, you say something. You wanted to say something?
No, I just thought, or is that the typical Kristiansand also learning? Because we're afraid to say, you know, we're so ambitious, we're so good, we're not just okay. Because that's the story about the people from the south.
Right.
They are just quiet, they are tired, they are just sedate.
You should see what Agnes is doing.
And we repeat ourselves, and that's why we don't tell, because we're not really.
Yeah, so what you're saying is you could be more
I
outward
still
going.
agree we're around 6.
But it's a bit more than average, yeah. Yeah. Like
Well, we should just say it. Yeah. It's important that we say it.
Yeah, okay, expression. Camilla's table.
3.
Camilla, you changed your attitude. You were at 8 earlier, now you're 3.
I've never been at 8. I've been 7.
Oh, you've been a 7. So you're a 3. You think what?
I think it's not distinct. We are not city for everybody.
Yeah.
It's a closed society.
Now this is really interesting. Look, are you listening to this? A closed society, not very distinct. This is interesting. I mean, the difference, yeah.
And it's a hidden structure of power.
Ah, right, a hidden structure of power that I've heard about. Yeah.
It's not very vital. It's a really good hardware, like the nature, the
buildings and all that.
Infrastructure is good, but the software is not that good.
Right. And that's really interesting. So that's an interesting contrast. You seem to be nodding, Mrs. Heritage. She's nodding. Maybe she's eating her hand. But I don't know your name, so I've got to obviously say something identified. Right, but the rest of that table, what did you,
I was 9 on the hardware.
No, 9 on the hardware, that's the first one, we got 9.
But the diversity and livability drew it down to 7.
Yeah. But broadly, but that's interesting that you sit next to each other, yeah. But I think what we can say, if we add up everything together, it's sort of 5.5, isn't it? Which is sort of, no, I'm not trying to say you're average, but do you see what I mean? If you took all the numbers together, and I know you can't really do that, but you would probably say, room for improvement. That would be the cliche, wouldn't it? Room for improvement. But this table is definitely the average table, and 5. This is sort of doing this all the time, 3-8, 3-8. And this is doing a bit of that as well, isn't it? Yeah. But anyway, that's great. The presentation, I'm sure Knut will give it to you all if you want it. It's on your machine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
So if you want that presentation, just ask it, or you send it to the people who came to the event if you want it, you know. And also, just before you leave, I've got various books of these little small books I have. You can also get them online anyway, but just take one or two. I'll put them on these chairs at the front there. Is that all right? If you want it. Okay, great. Now, what are the options? Anyway, thanks for playing the game. No, great.